good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Sullivan. I am with you here for an Eye Care for Your Brain. We've been meeting every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time right here on Facebook Live, but we usually meet from my desk in my office. Well, my office, unfortunately, like so many of you out there, is on lockdown for the foreseeable future. So tonight I am going to come from you from my kitchen table in my house, and I am enjoying a little bit of rosé, which fits in very nicely with our theme tonight because after all, grapes come from nature, so it fits in with the theme very well. I am so excited to be here with you. There is nothing that can stop us from getting together for the high quality brain health information that you have come to depend on from me in this channel here. So if you're bored during this very stressful time of quarantine, please go on our archives on the Facebook page or on YouTube, and there are literally hundreds of free brain health lectures on there to get you through any type of boredom or need to be stimulated by something other than Netflix or the news. So tonight what we're going to talk about is nature-based rehab. And the reason we need to talk about this is because the physical environment that is surrounding the person with any brain health challenge really matters. This is critically important. And what we can choose to do with the environment is either enhance the person's recovery or we can actually inhibit the person's recovery. So we really, of course, are always thinking about coping, recovery, and ultimately thriving with any type of brain health challenge as we move through recovery. Oops, sorry about that. And what we know from laboratory studies and studies of human beings is that the key to healing of all kinds, including neuroplasticity, is this really important combination of surrounding the person with an enriched environment and alternating that with very high quality rest, specifically the deep stages of sleep, but time where our nervous system can come down from that very high space where it likes to hang out during high times of stress and trauma. So if you are coming out of a hospitalization or time, in a rehab facility, or have just been diagnosed with something that is very overwhelming, your body and brain are going to get stuck in a state of hypervigilance. And so what's very important for brain health and psychological recovery is to do what we can to bring down the nervous system to a regular state, because then we can control it more easy. When trauma is repetitive or when someone has been in a very high stress situation for a very long time, the gauge kind of gets broken and people can stay at a very high level, and even when they're exhausted, they just can't relax. This is really the cause of a lot of sleep disorders that we see, is there's no sense of letting the guard down or being able to fully emerge into an environment. There's always a sense of having to look over your shoulder or really being on guard for the next shoe that's going to drop. So we really want to try to surround the person with a very secure, predictable environment. But the truth is the brain really wants to be stimulated in order to heal. So I'm thinking now of stroke recovery, TBI recovery, those kind of things. So what does this enriched environment really mean? Well, basically it's an appropriate multi-sensory environment. So what do I mean by that? That's a big term. Basically, not too much going on in the environment, but also not too little. It's a very fine line. There are so many opportunities in the environment surrounding the brain injured person to basically overwhelm or to underwhelm, and finding that sweet spot is actually quite a challenge because it's different for everyone, and we really need to be in good communication with the brain challenged person to know what is overstimulating them and what is really not. So our job is to really check in and see if there's an overstimulation, really foster a sense of harmony with our surroundings, complete connection, and a very deep feeling of security and predictability. If we could do this for everyone living with a brain health challenge, people would get a lot better, a lot sooner, and on a lot more deeper and meaningful level. So how do we provide this structured combination of resting and contemplating and meaningfully engaging in a way that doesn't overwhelm someone, or in a way that doesn't allow someone to be understimulated? That's really the challenge. Well, if you start to really think about what immersing yourself in nature does for us, it really fits the bill for both creating an enriched environment, but also a place of connection and peace. And so that's why it's really like a 2-for-1, and we have to really specify what we mean by being immersed in nature and what does that really look like. So what gets defined as nature? Well, it's any natural environment. It can be intentional. So an intentional natural environment is like your backyard deck, a healing garden, these kind of things. Or a totally wild natural setting, like standing on the shoreline of the ocean, looking at a trail, going through a forest. Soothing people back to health and wellness as a function of being in nature is something that is really as old as human beings have been around. It's something that you see in ancient Greek philosophers' writings. But in the 1800s, doctors actually started to prescribe nature as a means of treating afflictions and ultimately just contributing to overall wellness. And so the main prescription back then was for the outdoors, lots of fresh air, sunshine. These were considered medicines. And what was so cool about it is that people were actually the government was actually giving funding to programs to support these people. And one of the reasons it really started to happen was the Industrial Revolution. And so the idea was if people were working so hard in factories, this was such an unnatural environment for human beings that we also had to provide some respite if we were really going to have a strong workforce. But things really got cooking in the 1900s when people really started to gather around this idea of a sanatorium. Have you ever heard of that? This is the place where you basically went, and it was a very structured medical program where you were prescribed long walks, eating simple foods, taking thermal baths, and it really spoke to this whole idea of not being too stimulated, but also having a lot of structured routine and rest. So the first official sanatorium we think actually started in central England in the 1830s. And again, what was so cool, and I wish we could get back to this, is that governments were actually paying programs to serve the public in this way because they were concerned that we were starting to live in highly unnatural environments, that we were not meant to be at work 8-10 hours a day, and that we were getting further and further away from nature. So one of the biggest boons, and this is really interesting considering what we're going through right now, but it was really the last major respiratory illness, tuberculosis, that really pushed nature-based rehab. So I thought that was really interesting as we start to think about what we're going through right now. But basically by the late 19th century, the majority of Europeans and Americans were infected with tuberculosis. And in the urban environments, when people were crowded and living together. And about 80% of the people who got it died from it. So there was this very big push to get people into sanatoriums who had TB because the idea was that isolation was very unhuman and that the prescription at the time was to basically completely quarantine yourself. But people were rightfully concerned that that would basically be a form of psychological torture because we are so interpersonally connected. And so the idea was that we needed to get people close enough where they could enjoy a culture and relationship, but they could also be far enough away where they weren't going to catch something that was contagious. Isn't that interesting? So over time, what started to happen is that these nature-based rehabs started to be marketed not just to people who were unwell with some type of ailment. They used to treat things like gout and arthritis, but now it became just for the everyday person, right? And so the idea was that people were taking to the waters, hydrotherapy, these warm thermal baths, mineral springs were becoming really popular. And when I was doing my research for this lecture tonight, I thought this was fascinating and I've actually been to this place in Bath, England. But basically what a lot of these early sanatoriums did is they would basically build above the rubble that was left from Roman conquerors centuries earlier to create these therapeutic waters. So they basically had plumbing that had already been left there, and there was basically structure for these therapeutic baths, and they just built on top of it. I thought that was really interesting. One of my favorite places in the entire world is a place that offers therapeutic mineral springs, the most beautiful place called Ojo Caliente, which is in New Mexico. And if you are ever there, please, please, please look it up. It would be greatly worth your time and money. It's affordable and it's just absolutely beautiful. So when I brought all that up, all that history, because I want us to compare it to what the standard of care is now when people are unwell. And the first thing that came to my mind when I was thinking about this was locked memory units as it relates to my people with dementia, specifically those who have behavioral issues related to Alzheimer's typically. So what is the standard of institutionalized care in America right now? Well, it certainly is not nature-based. And so what I would love is for any of you who have recently been in facilities to basically chime in and let us know what was your relationship to the outdoors when you were in there. And I'm not bringing it up to criticize those places, because the individuals who run those places I know would love nothing more than to have the permission and the financial means to have nature-based programs. But the truth is, the way the programs are reimbursed nowadays, there is really not a respect for the fundamental need for human beings to be in nature. And so we really have to start to change the conversation about not just the actual therapy that happens in rehabs and the fact that it's not long enough and not enough people have access to it, but what is the actual physical environment that we're putting people in who have brain health challenges. So what does science tell us about what nature actually offers us? Like, I was curious, like, what is the physiological explanation besides just being a good natural fit? Well, there is a growing field called ecotherapy, and the whole idea is that they're really validating the kind of no-brainer idea that there's a very strong connection between time spent in nature and reduced stress, anxiety, and depression. So people who regularly visit natural environments recover much more quickly from high levels of stress. Now, who doesn't need that, especially nowadays? So studies really started in the late 1990s, early 2000s, with people just asking subjective reports of people who had been in nature. How do you feel once you're done? How do you come out? And so there's been a couple studies just asking people who have things like depression and anxiety how they feel after they take a green walk. So 71% of people with major depressive disorder said they definitely felt better. 50% of people said they felt less tension in their body, and 90% of people said it increased their self-esteem. There was another study in 2015 that really starts to get to the brain benefits, and this one was actually looking at people, and these weren't people who had any clinical disorder, but basically they had people walk for 20 minutes in a nature type setting or in a city. And what they were looking at was the activity of the prefrontal cortex. And what they found is that people who were in nature had a lot less overactivation of the prefrontal cortex. And this is important because when we are stressed, and especially when we are depressed or anxious, this part of the brain can go haywire, and it is the hub of rumination in the brain. So what I mean by that is that that's that broken record that just won't stop when you are stressed. That constant feeling of what if, a feeling like you can't control your thoughts, a feeling like it's doomsday, basically a sense of dread and panic. That's really your prefrontal cortex kind of just being on that broken record cycle. And so there's now research to suggest that when you go into nature, you're able to have more control over that autonomic loop, and you can actually put a stop to it. And we're going to talk in a minute about what is going on that actually allows us to stop. But there's really two very specific types of nature rehab that I've been researching in the last year, and I wanted to share those with you. So the first one is called walk and talk therapy. And I wonder if any of you have done this, because it's definitely something that is being offered. So basically, this is regular psychotherapy, but instead of sitting in an office or in someone's, across chairs from each other, you take a walk during the therapy session. And research suggests that this might actually be a particularly good approach for men, and especially people who have trauma and post-traumatic stress. So the idea is that walking may give us a needed distraction that actually is very helpful to allow us to tolerate speaking and thinking and processing about the most traumatic things that we're dealing with. So the idea is there's something pretty intense about two people sitting face to face. And for some people, sitting with the enormity of those emotions just might be too much, and they can't find the words to get it out. And we know that expression and identifying feelings is such an important thing. So walking, the idea is you're kind of a little bit distracted by the walkings, which is a pretty helpful idea. The other thing is that there's something very meaningful and symbolic about walking. Think about it. It's powerful. You are in control of what your body's doing. You're engaging in movement. You're literally moving forward. One of the most psychologically horrible things that happens to us in life is when we feel stuck. And so many of us have situations going on that are truly out of our control. a TBI that you really can't control, the fact that you had a stroke, the fact that your husband has Alzheimer's, the fact that you might have just lost your job, the fact that you're stuck at home all of a sudden being a teacher for your kids. There's a lot going on, especially right now, that truly is out of our control. So thinking of what that sphere of control that you have is very, very therapeutic. We also know, of course, exercise, movement, cardiovascular exercise has so many feel-good chemical benefits. Basically, the stress hormones get pushed way down and the feel-good hormones go way up. There's very long-lasting benefits to walking and exercise. So it's not just a therapeutic experience in that 45 or 60 minutes that you're with the therapist. It's really a way to break the cycle of depression, anxiety, and stress and basically reset your internal world. I think that's very helpful. The other thing I've been following is a practice called forest bathing, and I actually learned about this during my last trip to New Mexico. We were in a spa actually called 10,000 Waves. If anybody knows of that amazing place, please give me a little heart. It is based on a lot of Japanese therapeutic water traditions. And there was actually a book in the gift shop called Forest Bathing, and I just picked it up. I had no idea what it was about. But basically, forest bathing is somewhere between a fitness activity and a mindfulness exercise. And it's a term that came out of Japan in the 1980s called Shinrin-yoku. And the purpose of it was really twofold. The first thing was that Japan was really having a lot of professional burnout with the tech industry really booming. And they wanted to inspire citizens to reconnect with nature and to protect the country's forests because a lot was getting cut down to create factories and technology hubs. So over time, there has been a professional organization that's been developed called the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy that trains and certifies about 250 therapists per year. And their philosophy for the program is to help you be here in this moment and not there. And what they mean by that is really based on the research finding that we spend about 90% of our mental life in the past or in the future. That so little of our time is actually truly engaged with the present. And this is really the insight behind all of the mindfulness movement stuff that you keep hearing about, right? Just focus on now, what you can control now. So they've put out a fair amount of research where they've looked at people, again, walking in the city versus walking in the forest, but they've gotten a lot more objective in their measurements. And so what they've really focused on is the significant reduction in blood pressure that can happen after specifically a walk in the forest. So what they found is that after about 4 hours in the forest, most people's blood pressure goes down by about 15 points, which for some people that is extremely helpful and very important. So I wanted to understand more, again, of what the physiological mechanism was here. So part of what they talk about is that when we are in nature, our parasympathetic nervous system can actually take a breath. So remember before I was saying a big part of trauma of all kinds is that your nervous system can get really stuck. The meter, the gauge can get broken, and you don't have a lot of control to actually bring yourself down through the phases of relaxation to actually feel like you can let your guard down. Again, that's why so many of us struggle with sleep problems. But what we know about the parasympathetic nervous system is it's really like our rest and reset, rest and digest system. So it basically helps us calm down on a deep level. So your heart rate goes down, your muscles relax, your whole intestinal tract relaxes. And the whole idea is kind of a message to your mind that you don't have anything to do right now. You're just allowed to be. There's nothing you're gearing up, saving up energy for because you need to spring into action at some point. So your adrenal glands actually get a chance to chill out for a little bit. They also have done a lot of research about the aromatherapy of the forest, which is so interesting. And so they've really focused on the scent of cedar and the fact that this has a very distinct compound that when people are inhaling these tree-derived compounds, that it really enhances the activity of white blood cells and very dramatically reduces the stress hormone, specifically cortisol, that is pumping through our brains. And so mood, quality of life, and getting back motor function and also sensory hand-eye coordination function. We don't have great research on this. Many studies use different approaches. There's different outcome measures. There's different designs of studies. It's really not that well funded of an area. maybe because it's such common sense that it would be a good idea, if we are going to get more nature-based programs into most people's rehabilitation program, they're going to have to be validated concepts, and we're going to have funding. So that is absolutely key, that we get researchers who are interested in this stuff on board. So they've also talked a little bit about the psycho-evolutionary theory, and the idea here is that human beings through evolution are equipped with a very rapid ability to assess their safety in an outdoor environment. So basically deciding very, very quickly if this is safe or unsafe. And this is why things like dark, creepy forests, steep mountaintops, wild animals, and the dark stresses almost all of us out. While being in calm, well-lit, open natural spaces, there's research that suggests, especially in nature when we can see a very long distance away, we have this very deep unconscious feeling of being safe. And so there's a theory that this is why people love the ocean so much, is because we can see so far across the ocean water that we are very reassured that there's no predators out there who can sneak up on us. I thought that was so interesting. So basically what this is telling us is we are hardwired to relax when we feel safe in nature. And I want you to think about, again, the natural environment that surrounds people when they are in a hospital ward, when they live in a nursing facility, when they are in rehab. One of the things that pains me the most when I go to visit my patients or someone I care about in any type of institution is the environmental noise. So loud, so chaotic. I was recently at a memory care unit, and the door alarm for when people were going through the door was constantly going off. I could tell my blood pressure was out of control, and you could just see that it creates complete chaos in people with brain injuries. Again, people with brain injuries are very sensitive to noise, very sensitive to the environment, and when there's a feeling of being overwhelmed, this is when people are going to freak out, and we're going to have these so-called behavior symptoms. So we need to be very mindful about sound as a natural environment, not just visually what we can see. It's very cool that there is a dose-dependent relationship between nature and our mood. So this is one of the things scientists really look to for bona fide statistical relationships between the impact of a variable on something. And so basically the more time you spend in nature, the better, right? But what we do know is you really don't have to spend too much time to get some of the biggest benefits. So what we know is that even 20 to 30 minutes, 3 days a week, can get people's blood pressure down, and people can get that benefit of feeling like they can handle stress more easy. So of course the goal is to make these interactions a natural part of your life. And I always like to end these lectures, first I like to start off kind of educating you, help you understand what's at stake, and then I always try to end them with the practical tips of what you can actually do. But I do want to say one more thing about how this affects folks with brain injuries specifically. Okay, so one of the best things about being in nature is that it actually really helps us to focus our attention. And this is really key for people with brain health issues. So there's a theory called attention restoration theory. And the idea is that human beings can effectively recover their ability to focus attention more readily in natural environments. This is so important. So a huge job in brain recovery is gaining back the ability to focus your attention, concentrate, and not just be pinging all around the environment. Attention is what allows our brain to do everything else. If you don't have attention, it's very hard to make a plan, to implement a strategy, to make a short-term memory. It's very difficult to just simply figure out what to do. Getting people's attention back is so critical after a brain injury. Research tells us that when we're in nature, we can naturally sustain our focus a lot better because we are not pushing aside so many distractions. Attention is basically a dance between a whole lot of stuff coming at you and your brain filtering or gating or gauging or putting the brake on the things that are not important, the things that are unessential. This gets broken in almost every type of brain injury, especially at the very beginning. That's the whole reason people feel overstimulated, is they cannot figure out what to pay attention to. Everything feels important, and we only have a finite amount of mental energy in any given moment. So if there's too much coming at you, it's irritating and it's exhausting. And so we have to be very mindful about, again, not overstimulating people. But what is so cool about being in nature is you don't have to do anything. Your only job when you are in nature is to simply be there, right? Be there now. This is so important. So the basic message of this lecture tonight is you got to get yourself out there. You got to get back into nature. It's got to be considered part of your rehab. It's not just about going to PT, going to OT, doing your exercises. It's about the environment you allow around you every single day. Your hearing environment, your visual environment, your body environment. Most of our evolution as human beings, we were not in environments that had walls. We were not with lights. We were not in buildings, okay? How much of our time is spent indoors now? How much of our time, especially through this corona crisis, is spent with a device this close to your face, okay? Let this information tonight be that little nudge that you needed to recommit to your nature-based practice, okay? So like I said, when you're in nature, you're just noticing. The best part is no agenda. You're not fixing anything. All are you simply doing is being present, okay? You're focusing on your senses. When you are in nature, things are just happening at a very natural pace. Things aren't rushed, right? You look at one bird, you notice the beautiful feathers. Oh, they look so cool. Then next thing you know, you relax a little bit. Oh, wow, there's a squirrel over there. You don't typically have a lot going on in any specific moment when you're in nature. Things just seem to unfold in a very organic, natural way. So if you can walk, make it a daily practice. It's really cool to see your neighborhood in different times of the year and to notice what's changing. If you can't walk, please get someone to help you gain access to the outdoors, whether it's getting in a wheelchair, whether it's opening the window, setting up a bird feeder outside your window, whatever it takes. If you're in a facility, if you're a family member of someone in a facility, get them to try to let some fresh air in. Even if you or someone you know is totally unable right now to get outside and get fresh air, think about that cedar in the aromatherapy machine, right? You can put that on a little light bulb and it will just infuse the environment with the scent of being out in a forest. Even just listening to nature sounds has been proven to have very similar effects to actually being in nature. There was a study in 2017 in a journal called Scientific Reports where they used an MRI scanner to measure brain activity in people as they just listened to sounds that were either recorded in a natural environment or more of an artificial kind of environment like a mall, okay? And what they found is when people were listening to natural sounds, they were able to focus outward more, which is basically the distraction of inattention when you have a brain injury is that you're so consumed with your own experience, it's very hard to focus on what other people say or what's going on in the environment. So listening to the artificial sounds, what they found was people were going in more. When people go in more, they're less connected with the outside world, less connected to conversations. This is the setting for anxiety, worsening post-traumatic stress, depression, okay? Even looking at pictures of nature, get out the old vacation photos. Look at a place, once this quarantine is over, a place that you want to go out and visit. Anything natural at this time is very, very helpful. The bottom line is that disconnection from nature is abnormal. It is not normal for us to not be deeply immersed with nature, and it will make anything that you are struggling with worse. I want you to think of nature as a psychological tranquilizer that allows you to unplug from all the responsibilities and the heaviness of what's going on in your life. Right now, a lot of us have almost a compulsive need to figure out what the state of the world is due to this global pandemic. I want you to stay informed, but do not get swallowed up in the news and the stress, especially if you have a history of anxiety or depression. You really have to make going outdoors a priority, even if you have to really, really, really push yourself. You only need a recap of what's going on in the world right now to stay safe. You don't need the television on all day, okay? I promise it will make you feel worse and increase your feelings of helplessness and worry. So please tell me right now in the comments, what are you going to do after this stern, loving talking to that is going to help you reconnect with nature? I promise you the benefits are multiple, and you will immediately, even after the first time you go out for a walk, you're going to say, why don't I do this more often? This is so important to my well-being. I would very much appreciate if you guys would share this video. It's so important that people hear these messages. I'm going to be back with you next week with a very specific message for all of you out there who are living with a brain health thing as it relates to this coronavirus. I've been getting a lot of messages here wondering if folks with stroke are at increased risk, or I'm worried about, my mom who's had, Alzheimer's. What is she going to do if she has to go into the hospital? So over the next week, I'm going to try to put together some of my best advice on how to specifically manage what's going on in the world right now. I so enjoyed having you guys over tonight. Hopefully a glass of wine is in your future if that's appropriate for you. And I hope you all stay very well and safe during this time. And I really look forward to seeing you next week again right here at the kitchen table. Thank you guys so much. Take care.